Hi, friends. Welcome back to the ArCast. We got a really cool guest, Brennan Lamey, who founded Kwil. And he's an interesting dude who's doing a lot of really cool things in the Arweave ecosystem. I've wanted to have him on the ArCast for a while, and we just had a really fun event in Austin. So, Brennan, welcome to the ArCast. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
You live in Austin, right?
I do, yes.
But you grew up in Boise?
Yeah, Boise, Idaho.
What was your first exposure to the internet as a kid in Idaho?
I'm sure it was Google, but the first one I remember was Webkins. It was a little game where you would have pets, like these virtual pets, and you could play it with your friends. I remember one of our friends got us on it when we were 5 years old, and that was the first time I really used the internet by myself.
Having a young mindset with gaming makes it easy to think about, okay, what's possible to do in this digital sphere?
Minecraft is known for being very extensible. There's a huge modding community around it. And because I was on Mac, I had to figure out how to install a lot of the mods for the game myself. It was mostly made for Windows. And so that kind of threw me into a lot of the basics of computers at a pretty young age and got me really interested in them.
Minecraft was a helpful part of your career, maybe.
Oh, certainly. You can build full computer circuits in Minecraft, and the first cool engineering stuff I did before I ever had any sort of engineering, even in school, was in Minecraft. And so I think within reason, there's probably some value in them.
Something interesting about Minecraft is the aesthetics are very DIY, and it's like the blocks. You literally see the blocks, right? You could even say there's a chain of blocks that you're building in Minecraft. You're an engineer, you're a dev. I thought it'd be interesting to talk about your journey from being a kid, growing up, going to college, being at USC, and then launching Kwil.
During COVID, I took a gap year from school. I was taking mechanical engineering at USC. And it was in this gap year, I had a full-time internship, but I don't think it was really interesting to me. And so I spent a lot of my time doing things that I thought were interesting, which were mostly related to computer programming. And what I would do is I would just choose something that I thought was cool, and I would just go build something with it. And actually, I played with I guess it's not the OG, but I played with GPT-2 before GPT was popular. I played with GPT-2, trying to make sort of my own version of what now is ChatGPT. But that was one of the original things I did. I spent a lot of time on that one. And I built a couple other applications. How I got into Web3 was one day on my lunch break at this internship. I was a little bored. Work was a little slow that day because I was an intern. And so I went to Barnes & Noble, and I just walked in and I saw a book on Solidity, which is used for making smart contracts on Ethereum. And so I was like, oh, that looks cool. I know nothing about Ethereum. And so I bought that book and I started making a few smart contracts. And that was how I got into Web3. I wanted to build a messaging application. And in particular, I wanted to incentivize serving data in places where you're otherwise disincentivized to serve it. So think non-Western countries. And I wanted to incentivize serving data for a messaging application with the end goal of uncensorability. Now, I needed a place to store that data. It was really expensive to do that on Ethereum. There was an article comparing, I think it was Filecoin and SIA, and it gave a special shout out to Arweave at the bottom. And it was oh, you pay once and it stores forever. And I was oh, that seems way better for what I need to do. And I found my way into Arweave that way. This was a little over 2 years ago at this point. And spent the next year building that social messaging application. And in order to build that, we had to build some pretty interesting data infrastructure for that. And we ended up just making that data infrastructure our product instead. And that is now Kwil, the database.
When I interview people on the ArCast, I love to know about the names they came up with for their projects. So Kwil, because it's the pen, the quill and the pen, you would write as messaging, or what's the genesis of the company's name?
Yeah, that is correct. So it started as Ecclesia, which is a Greek word. So originally I wanted to do Agora, which interestingly enough, there was a project named Argora that came up later in the Arweave ecosystem. But I wanted to do Agora because the Agora was the town square for Greek communities. And I thought that had some really cool ties to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Unfortunately, we did not end up doing Agora, just the IP rights. I looked at the IP rights, too hard to get that. But there was Ecclesia, which literally translates to church, but more commonly used to reference also meeting places and town halls. And so the social, we originally called it Ecclesia. And we rebranded to Kwil for the social. It was still very writing based, but it was shortly after that we we pivoted to just doing the data infrastructure for that. But we kept the name Kwil because it was equally as applicable. And actually, interestingly enough, one of the most popular traditional SQL databases in the world, it's called SQLite. It's like a logo is also Kwil.
Cool.
Just complete. This is before we did databases, but yeah. So yeah, that was how we chose those two names.
The preservation of language reflects the history of our culture. And you think of the word agoraphobic, right? Not wanting to go out in public. That must come from the Greek not wanting to be in the town square.
Yeah. I haven't thought of that, but it must be.
The words we choose and the stories we tell and how we tell them is like one continued database. And that's what's so interesting about Arweave is that it protects the whole history. So you can not only see why things are named that, but how we've documented resources and how things are connected. Decentralized databases. Let's talk about connections with Kwil version 2.
Yeah, so databases, so there are a lot of different types of databases, and technically blockchains are databases, but when people talk about databases, they don't usually mean blockchains. They really have in mind more traditional database functionality. And the type of database we are building, it's called a relational database or a SQL database or SQL database, and it stores data. It's called structured data, but it stores it in tables. And so visually, you can think of this like an Excel spreadsheet. You have rows and columns, and there's a language called SQL, and it reads like plain English, and it allows you to cut up all of the rows and columns of these spreadsheets. They're not really spreadsheets, but you can conceptually think of them like that. But it allows you to cut up all the rows and columns and combine them in new and interesting ways, or split them apart and merge them and look through them super efficiently to get new insights or to look at pieces of valuable data or really anything else. And yeah, that's like what a relational database does. And we are bringing that to Arweave. And so I think a good model for Arweave would be it's like a folder on your computer. You can dump a ton of stuff in there, and if you know where you put it, you can come and get it later. But if you can't structure this into tables, and there isn't really an efficient way to look through it. There's just one way to look through it, which is you look through all of it till you find what you need. And actually, this is where we get into where RIO comes in to actually indexing the data that is on Arweave. Kwil doesn't index data on Arweave. You store data in these tables directly on Kwil. But yeah, that's kind of like what we're doing and where it fits into the decentralized data tools more broadly.
The ability to shift through the mound of all the atoms that are the data in Arweave. Would you consider Kwil a layer 2?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Kwil, the actual state of your database, it's held on separate nodes that you can think of them as sitting above the Arweave network, somewhat similar to a gateway.
How can Kwil and RIO work together?
The only people solving this in the way we need are RIO, or is RIO. But so RIO, it's very useful for finding bits of data in Arweave's entire ocean of data. And RIO is very useful for finding small bits of that ocean or sections of that ocean and using that for your application. Kwil is, I don't think it's entirely accurate, but maybe taking that one step further where we can actually take data and package it into these building blocks that you can then, put on top of each other and combine with each other to build entire structures. But I would generally say that Kwil is farther up the stack than RIO. So RIO, its entire responsibility is having a comprehensive view of Arweave and where that data lives. And when somebody needs to access some data, it can tell them, hey, this is where you're going to go and find it. Kwil, it is much more useful for applications where they already generally know what data is going to be accessible from their application. They need maybe more complex functionality for searching through that, but at the trade-off of not being able to access anything that exists in Arweave. It's a bit more contained within their application. How we actually got down the rabbit hole, this might be generally applicable, and it's probably the easiest example we have. When we were building the social, we were trying to build follower relationships. So I follow you on this decentralized social, and then you can, not only can I see everyone I follow, you can also see everybody who follows you. And that's the hard part. Building directly on Arweave or on the Arweave gateway, it would be very easy to say, all right, this is everybody I follow. But it's really hard to see who follows me. You can't really make that relationship and search through that quickly to get that within an application. Just the way that Arweave indexing works, it's just near impossible to do that on the base Arweave protocol, or I would even say at the gateway level, at least as it exists right now. And so how that is usually handled is with databases, and somewhat more specific databases, either graph or SQL databases for that particular use case. But I'm trying to find the best way to explain this. When we're building directly on Arweave and using an Arweave gateway to get all of our data, you would store who you follow as a list. So you say, this is everybody I follow. If you go and follow someone else, you take your list that's on Arweave, you add one more to it. If I want to know who follows me, that means I need to know about everybody else's list. And I need to go and search through everybody's list to see who has me in their list. But in a database, we don't need that. In a database, you can have what's called a join table. And this essentially allows there to be one place where I follow you, but similarly, like it's really easy for you to go and see everybody who follows you as well. So how that works, and this is like a little bit of an abstraction, but imagine Excel spreadsheets where there are two columns, and in those columns, there is the person following someone and who they're following. And so you can either say, give me everybody in the follower column where the person that they are following equals this, or the other way around. And so this allows you to really efficiently look through that data and find the correct result.
You're basically essentially building structure around this data and making it easier to have access to, because that was something that was a theme in Permapalooza, was speed. The way for things to be adopted is to make them efficient. I think you made the point that like if people have to wait forever, they're going to be less likely to adopt Arweave, for example.
Absolutely. And this was actually something we saw for us. So this was a slightly different part of our decentralized social, but it was like getting a user's feed. So getting everybody you follow and then getting the posts for them and getting the 10 most recent posts or the 20 most recent posts of every person or amongst everybody you follow. That's different for every user. And so doing that just like on the gateway level, that would take us like 15 to 20 seconds to perform. And that would actually only get worse over time. Obviously, nobody's going to use an application that has a load time like that. And so we were able to get that down to below 1 second because we were storing data in this structured storage that allowed us to look up quicker. It allowed us to look up what we needed quicker. And also it allowed us to not look through what we did not need. So one of the primary reasons why we first built Kwil, the database, was so that we could have much better lookup speeds on our social application.
When they invented the MP3 technology, they figured out algorithmically what sounds your ear didn't listen to, and they took it out of the WAV file, and they were able to compress it in a way that made it more efficient. Figuring out what's needed and what's not, essentially. It seems like that's one of Kwil's main cool things it does, huh?
At its core, a relational database, its job is to store data with some guarantees on how that data gets stored, and then super efficiently find that. And you want to find that in the most efficient way possible. And that isn't necessarily true for something like Arweave, whose job it is to just store data horizontally at about the same price, no matter how much data is stored.
As someone who studied smart contracts and SmartWeave, what would you say is the main difference between an Ethereum smart contract and SmartWeave?
Let's compare Arweave to Ethereum, right? Arweave, it doesn't actually do computation on the network, or it does some, but not it doesn't do business logic on the network. It just stores data, it retrieves that data. Ethereum, when you are interacting with an Ethereum smart contract, you're doing some mathematical operations. Say I'm subtracting 10 tokens from my balance and I'm adding 10 tokens to yours. Every node in the Ethereum network has to do that operation. They have to do that calculation, and then they get an end result, and that is what they store on their nodes. And so when you're doing an action on the Ethereum network, all of the nodes are executing this. On Arweave doesn't even have execution. So if we want smart contracts, we can't do it that way. And so they had this really novel idea of, I believe they call it lazy evaluation, where you go and you execute a smart contract the first time, and you say, all right, this is my result. And now if I want to add my own result, I have to recompute your answer. And if I got the right answer, then I'm allowed to put my answer. And then when somebody else wants to come and interact with that after I do, they have to show that they got the same answers that you got and that I got in order to add theirs onto the end. And so in this way, let's move past like general arithmetic and let's move to something like a machine learning model. So in the case of Ethereum, if you're running a machine learning model, every node on that network is going to have to run the entire machine learning model, which is very expensive. In Arweave, there still are some expense concerns, but they're a lot less. And this even gets better when we get into like hashing of SmartWeave state. But this gets even better where if you can execute some machine learning model in a smart contract, and then I have to recompute that, but then I get to add on my own as well. And so in that instance, there are less people that have to do these calculations than there are in the Ethereum model. Now, there's some trade-offs here, and there are also ways around those trade-offs, but generally that's how I think of the technical implementation differences. I'm also going to say I'm not an expert on really either of those, but that is like my somewhat high-level understanding.
Does Kwil incorporate SmartWeave with the database management?
Right now, Kwil does not incorporate SmartWeave with the database management. So Kwil, it acts as a layer 2 on top of Arweave, and it works like the Ethereum model. So if you're changing some data on Kwil, there are some computations that have to occur, and it has to, every node in the network has to do those. They have to do that when it happens, and then they don't really have to do that again. Or there are some instances that they do. I won't really go into that. But yeah, it works a little bit more like the Ethereum model. I think when it comes down to which one you want, it really depends on the application you're building. In the case of a relational database, we determined that model was what worked best for a relational database, and so that's why we chose it. Something that exists with Kwil is that there's generally a lot of writes, or relatively a lot of writes to the network. And so if we used SmartWeave, each time you want to add one, you're going to have to go and recompute all of those previous ones. And relational databases are pretty computationally intensive, or relatively computationally intensive. And so that would get pretty unscalable pretty quickly. And so that's why we went for the more traditional. Now, that's not true for other applications built on SmartWeave. It's very specific to relational databases.
What advice would you give for organizations who want to incorporate Kwil and build on Arweave?
Yeah. When you build on Kwil, you're not a client of Kwil. You are an extension of Kwil, and Kwil is an extension of you. I think that's just generally true for Web3 protocols. The whole thing about a protocol is that nobody owns it. Neither of us own Arweave, but similarly, Sam, who founded Arweave, also does not own Arweave. Nobody owns these protocols. They plug into your application, and they function as they function. And so I would say that is just like generally a very important aspect of permissionless applications. I would say for people that are looking to use Kwil or incorporate Kwil into their application, the number one thing I would recommend is reach out to me. Like, we want to help. Obviously, if you don't want to reach out to me, if you're gun shy or anything else, then read our docs. We have some really awesome tutorials. We have some tutorial videos, some tutorial blogs. But we want to help you beyond just getting data stored for your product. Because you are an extension of us, your success holistically is our priority. Whatever that means for you, we want to help you achieve that. Now, in most cases, that does mean helping you store and look at data efficiently, but there might be other cases as well. And yeah, we want to help in whatever way possible. And so come find us. Yeah, we want people to come. We want them to extend our code. We want them, if it sucks, come tell us it sucks.
Are there any upcoming features or developments that users can look forward to?
Generally, access control. So people that need unique types of access control for reading and writing data. If you're building a dApp that is creating valuable data and you need the value of that data to accrue to your token, this is like where we're building a lot of pretty interesting features on Kwil. This is actually true for a lot of data that's important for traders, people that are where time really matters for them. A lot of the data that they purchase is only valuable in the first minute or 5 minutes of when they purchase it. And after that, it's not really super valuable. Maybe 95% of the value of that single piece of data exists within the first 5 minutes that data itself exists. And so obviously the security of this is not, the security requirements are not the same as a top secret system, but we can still harness a lot and capture a lot of the value of this data on Kwil, and not only just capture that value, but have it accrue to your token. So if you are building a DAO and it's producing valuable data, we can help to capture that and make sure that your community is getting value for what they created.
Where can people learn more about Kwil?
Just go to our main website, kwil.com, kwil.com. Then if you are looking to get started with Kwil, I would point you to docs.kwil.com, which contains our docs, as well as We have an in-browser IDE for building Kwil databases. You don't have to download anything. You don't have to install any VS Code plugins. You don't even really have to be a developer. If you're like a business analyst and knows SQL, I'm very confident you could get this figured out in our in-browser IDE. And so all it is ide.kwil.com. Those are probably, if you're looking to either collaborate or to start building with Kwil, those are probably the best places to start.
If anyone wants to get in touch with you directly, do you hit people back?
My Twitter is probably the easiest one. It's just Brennan_Lamey. Or if you DM Kwil on Twitter, it's just Kwil team. Yeah, we're a small team. We're a 7-person team. And so if you find a way to get into contact with Kwil, I'll certainly hear about it. And I'm more than happy to jump on a call.
You've built a really cool asset for Arweave. So that's what's up. Thanks, man.
Yeah, it's really been a pleasure.